we have an echo now of these two periods, the 1960s and the 1980s, that I think affect our attitude toward nuclear power. And, well, let me make a mild argument in its favor. First, the other ways we have of making power are really, really bad. I mean, fossil fuels are a massive threat to us. It's hard to imagine that coal is more dangerous than Chernobyl or 3 Mile Island, but it is. It's just more dangerous in a slow way. Even though Chernobyl was a massive disaster, and 3 Mile Island was a dreadful business as well. It did not flood major cities. It did not melt Antarctica. It did not lead to changes in patterns of rainfall. There was no danger that it would cause famine. Whereas global warming could easily lead to a lack of snow in the Italian Alps, and you would have no water in Milan. To have no water is a very serious business. You're not going to pipe any water from anybody else. Nobody would give you any. It's obvious that European weather is destabilizing. You can count the number of floods that have happened in the past 10 or 15 years, the number of violent storms that have appeared. There isn't a lot else that Europeans are doing. The Germans are doing a great job with solar. The Dutch and the Danes have windmills like everybody's business. The Italians, not really doing very much about it. When you have some windmills, you have wind resources, you have solar. There's scarcely any solar in Italy. Nobody in Italy does anything about it. Basically, you just buy fossil fuels like everybody else. And as the situation grows more intense and climate change becomes worse, you will realize you were culpable with this, and you are going to suffer for it rather a lot. Now, nuclear power is kind of the mildest form of what people are now calling geoengineering. If you talk to climatologists and engineers about the threat of global warming, they have given up on public policy and they're beginning to discuss seriously massive efforts to just engineer the planet into some survivable form. Now, I happen to be a science fiction writer, so I'm naturally a kind of person who hears a great deal about insane schemes of this kind. I could sit here and talk about geoengineering schemes for an hour and a half. There are long lists of them. Some are insane. Some are very insane. Some are extremely dangerous. Some are only so dangerous that desperate people would do them. But desperate people will do desperate things. And nuclear power is just about the least desperate thing one can do. I mean, compared to other prospects, such as throwing iron filings into the sea, or trying to float soot in the sky to reflect light, I mean, just terrible schemes. Nuclear power is the least scary, massive technical intervention. The second most appealing one is probably genocide. Just killing half of everybody. I mean, because that would cut carbon emissions in half, and then we'd have plenty of room, and there'd be much less consumer demand, and half of us would be dead. I mean, look at the guy next to you, the woman next to you, she's dead. The other guy on the other side, he's okay. You have a 50-50 chance of being dead. That's what genocide looks like. The likelihood of that happening before any of these other geological schemes, very, very high. Because genocide's really cheap. And we really, really know how to do it. We've got plenty of practice. And Europeans are the world leaders in this regard. Nobody can touch them. They've got A history of genocide that even Americans blush at. They are the world's greatest genocidal practitioners. And compared to that, nuclear power, with all its ugliness, is actually quite appealing. Now, in order to do the kind of stuff that STEWART Brand talks about in his book, it'll take at least 20 years. Even if you drop every opposition to nuclear power, and you ran outside and just said, I want more uranium. It would take 20 years to do it. And not only that, but the uranium is not a renewable resource. So it would only last about 60 years. And then you'd kind of be back where you started. You'd be out of uranium and there wouldn't be any nuclear power. There'd be some thorium. But basically, you would have engaged in a very, very expensive, very, very dangerous geoengineering scheme that might or might not help save world civilization. I think you ought to get ready. I don't think you're going to have many other opportunities. There are some. I mean, if I were Italian and of a technological bent, I was a high-tech guy, I wouldn't really want any nuclear power because Italy doesn't have any uranium. So you're merely trading your dependence on oil and coal for a dependence on some shiny metal that is also very dangerous and poisonous. If I were Italian, I'd want to go into cellulosic ethanol, which is a bioengineering scheme to crack cellulose, which is just basically straw, and turn it into alcohol. Nobody really knows how to do this cheaply. You're going to have to bioengineer some bacteria in order to do it. It's a genetically modified industry. There are a lot of reasons not to like genetic modification. People in Torino and Piemonte, they hate this stuff. They have good reasons to hate it. It's actually an advantage to Piemonte not to have GMO food because people are nervous about it. They all rush over there in order to eat food which isn't tainted. Okay, nobody's going to be eating the straw. And if you can actually turn straw into alcohol, you'd be in the same situation as, say, Brazil, who basically runs their country on alcohol now because they have sugar cane and they just brew rum and they just burn the rum in the cars and everyone's happy and you'd be a nice regional power. And eventually, after 80 years, when all the nuclear power plants were built and they had all burned up all the uranium and there was nothing left but giant piles of waste and huge nuclear castles, you would be in a position to say, well, we're Italians and we kind of have the way forward. Like, look, we can turn straw into gold and that will be great for you. But whether you have the political will to do a wise thing like that, I have no idea. These are not happy times, especially in the United States, where both Stewart and I come from. Stewart is from California, I am from Texas. We don't have very much good political news to offer to the rest of the world. I mean, his society is a little less demented than mine, but they're crazy in California anyway. Everyone knows it. This is not, we don't really have answers to offer the rest of the world. In the next 50 years, it's not really in the hands of Californians. It's in the hands of Brazilians, Indians, Chinese, young people. I think Stewart is trying to build a monument here. He really does want to leave some kind of thumbprint on the millennia. And he's a far-sighted man who I think is offering a troubled society the best advice that he can. So I would urge you to read what he says, first of all. And I would urge you to look at the advice he offers and the spirit in which he offers it. Because although he is an old man, he is not an old-fashioned man. It's rare to meet someone with so much experience who is so relentlessly forward-looking and genuinely insightful. I pay a lot of attention to him. It was my pleasure and honor to come here and see him very briefly. I was sorry that he had to go so quickly, but that does not surprise me. He is a thinker in great demand. So, in conclusion, I hope that the Italians will not fold their hands. We just heard a lot about long-term thinking from a guy who comes from a very young society. In 1848, there were civilians in this city stabbing Austrian soldiers to death with knives. Women were on top of buildings, throwing jars on top of Austrian soldiers in 1848. The year of Milanese rebellion, the Cinque Giornate. And the scars of that thing are all over the city. You can see cannonball holes in certain buildings in Milan from the Cinque Giornate. I've seen them. Okay, in 1848 in California, you could hear crickets chirping. There was nothing. There were like 5 white guys and some gold. That was about all there was. And in 1849, there were thousands of people because there was money and there was gold, and everybody, including many, many Italians, rushed to California. But in 1848, there was nothing. So you're an older and you ought to behave as a wiser society. And I hope you will think and I hope you will act. So thank you for your attention.